So a pretty big news has completely gone under the radar as Blizzard announced that we will be seeing primordial trolls on the Dragon Isles. To those familiar with troll history, this is actually really big as these trolls might predate the Zandalar, and we always knew the Zandalar as the original troll tribe, the tribe from whom the entirety of the troll race came to be, even the Night Elves and the various elven variations. This means that we might be getting a huge amount of troll history that might just change everything from the root itself. So who could these primordial trolls be, and what will we be seeing in Dragonflight? You must have wiped out a million times in your WoW years, but you probably didn't have Squad OE with you. And this is an app that records your instances automatically, and you can see your complete performance from spell visualizations to death recaps, and best of all, it is free. You don't have to do anything but install it, and you can share yours and watch your friend's perspective. So use the link in the description and check out Squad OE. To start, there is overall a pretty big problem in WoW lore in general, and that is that quite a bit of the actual lore is vague. In fact, a lot of it is vague. Now, the Chronicle book came out some years ago to fix this issue, then out of the blue, they decided to turn this encyclopedia as a Titan perspective writing, mainly just gibberish propaganda, meaning that most of it is probably not true, and that ended up making things even more confusing from lore perspective when you want to actually say something concrete. However, over the various sources, we do have a decent amount of history about the trolls. When you examine the playable races, pretty much all of them are descendants of the Titanforge that devolved in some manner, but there is also the other significant part, and those are the troll descendants that have an entirely different story, or so we think at this point in time. Trolls are said to be one of the very first and the most important native races to Azeroth. Now, it is unclear how the native races came to be, as generally only the elementals are truly native to a planet, but from the Well of Eternity, which is the wound of the World Soul, one created by the Titans unintentionally, the cycles of growth and rebirth were significantly altered on the ancient primordial continent that was once known as Kalimdor. This resulted in a lot of sentient life forms arising from the wilderness. The most significant of these forms was the troll race. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the history, you probably already know at this point, but originally they were scattered in tribes and then they were united under the Empire of Zol. Essentially, the original troll civilization were the Zandalari, and from them all the various tribes and separate empires arose. Now, why is this relevant to Dragonflight and the most recent news that we have? Well, in the actual announcement trailer, Blizzard told us that we'll be seeing a lot of the new and the old races that we've known from before on this brand new continent. One of these being the Centaur that you're all too familiar with, as well as the Taskar, but they also quite briefly, without too much information, mentioned that we will be visiting the so-called primordial trolls. Personally, this kind of completely flew past me in the original announcement, but when you examine this could have some really interesting implications. The thing is, what does primordial even mean? As I mentioned, originally trolls were in small tribes ruled by the Shadowhunters, then they united under the Zandalari Empire, and they were the most dominant force on Kalimdor for quite a few years, like thousands of years. Keep in mind, at the time Kalimdor was just a singular mega continent. Now, the Zandalari had a pretty big caste system, and from this caste system, tribes eventually were created, so we got the Drakari, the Gurubashi, the Yamani, and the like. There was even a tiny tribe of pretty weird looking trolls called the Dark Trolls that lived in caves that, with the help of the Well of Eternity, evolved into the Night Elves, and from them we got the various types of elves such as the High Elves, Blood Elves, and all sorts of elves. Now, all of this happened ages ago. Trolls are a really ancient race, so we could date this to maybe 20,000 years ago. Like 15,000 years ago, they faced off against the old god Akir in a massive, super long war across the entirety of Azeroth, and as you all know, the Dragon Isles were hidden 10,000 years ago. However, on these Dragon Isles, we are witnessing the primordial trolls, the progenitors. Trolls had a history for as long before the Sundering as after the Sundering, so I can see two scenarios with these primordial ones. Either they're related to the Zandalari, which I don't see why that would be interesting, as we already play as the Zandalari. We had an entire expansion about them, or more like a scenario, we might witness their original form, something we had never seen before. This might be their birthplace, where the race was created from. Sure, we know that they came together under the Zandalari banner and evolved further with the Well of Eternity, but what if not all of them followed? What if a tribe remained back on the Dragon Isles? Now, keep in mind, we still don't know what the Dragon Isles really are or much about them in general. We know that the current approximate location, but we don't know what part of the original continent it was, or whether it really was an isle long ago. But this is the really interesting part. We might be visiting the ancestors to all the trolls and elves, and it could lead to some really interesting scenarios. This could be just like how Ulduar was for the dwarves back in Wrath of the Lich King. This could be the same scenario, but for the trolls and the elves. First, and the one that I really hope is not the case, is that they could just dismiss them as yet another Titan creation. This, in my opinion, would be incredibly boring, as pretty much every single race on Azeroth is some form of a de-evolved Titan Forge that was altered over the course of time. We already witnessed the Pantheon of Death being created from prototypes in Zed Mortis and all those robots, so I really hope the original trolls are not just some type of automatons. What I think could be a lot more interesting is elemental magic and this relation to their primal roots. As was already confirmed in Dragonflight, there seems to be a lot of magic beneath these lands and a lot of elemental magic, primal magic. As you may know, elementals are the most basic life forms on planets. Well, it was confirmed that as the Isles awaken, so do some of the most ancient enemies of the dragons, the so-called Jardin. They seem to be heavily elemental related, and they could also be related to the trolls. Maybe they might be some of their long-lost cousins, so sort of like an orc-ogre relationship, I think. We also don't know whether these trolls will be friendly to the dragons or enemies. Maybe they refuse to cooperate with the dragons, or maybe they bonded with them. Now, I gotta point out one thing though, it is incredibly weird how little connection there is between trolls and dragons, despite them being some of the most dominant races on Azeroth. Well, both of these races being dominant at the same time. Also, we have seen trolls ride dinosaurs, flying dinosaurs, yet they barely have any connection to actual dragons that were all over Azeroth. Now, in regards to the scenario, if it is not elemental stuff, there could be a relation to dinosaurs again, as a popular theory that has been around is that they might be the most ancient of ancestors to the trolls, maybe even some type of lizards, as trolls can resemble them a bit with their tusks, sometimes scale-like skin, and also their inherent connection with them in the form of Dinomancers. So this could make for a bunch of really interesting new content. Another interesting bit is that we might finally learn what voodoo actually is. If these are the primal trolls, they might also be dealing with primordial magic, and we might learn what the source of voodoo is, and also where do all the troll traditions come from. It is 100% possible, as the trolls evolved over time, that they just completely forgot about where all their traditions came from. This is most apparent with the Night Elves that pretty much forgot they were even trolls in the first place. So anything is really possible with these primordial ones, but I gotta say, it is a really interesting new feature. They were pretty much frozen in time for 10,000 years. They might look like the Zandalari, they might even be more humanoid or maybe even less. We don't really know the concept. They could be giants, they could be small, or they might not even resemble trolls at all. Definitely would be exciting to learn more about these primordial trolls. Thank you for watching. Check out what is going on with the Sword of Sargeras by clicking on the screen, and check out Auron's Academy for videos on real-world history. See you next time.